Hi, everyone. Yes, I think this is working. Good afternoon, and thanks for your patience while we were dealing with IT problems. We have Marieke Scholz already online. Marieke, I think you can see us and hear us. Good, so the technology is working. So welcome. Look, we are the final panel of the day, so we need to keep you a little bit entertained. So I hope we will achieve that and keep it kind of interactive and an interesting topic. So what we're going to speak about today is the energy sector and competition law. And of course, you all know that the energy sector is making headlines these days, and it has gone way beyond our little, antitrust world in the mainstream, with everybody talking about it and consumers being particularly worried. And I put some quotes, in this slide where you can see the headlines that the energy crisis is making these days. So you can see, of course, Ursula von der Leyen speaking a lot about it and saying, things about the European Green Deal, that consumers are really keen, to see the future being green, but also, of course, speaking about the crisis that we're all facing now due to the war in Ukraine and prices being very high indeed and consumers being really worried. Save gas for a safe winter, the EU is planning emergency interventions, etc. So the European Commission, beyond the competition world that we will focus on in this slide, is really focusing on this issue. And they have brought forward a number of instruments, to try to help with this crisis. Things from basically, the joint purchasing of gas that we will discuss a little bit, tools to improve liquidity and storage of gas for the coming winter, and more recently, just last week, I think it was, the emergency intervention with exceptional electricity demand reduction, measures, and also measures to redistribute the energy sector's, revenues, basically, surplus revenues to final consumers. And all this, of course, fits in the medium-longer term, if you want, with the Commission's Green Deal and Green Agenda, which eventually, will help Europe with a diversification of supply and security of supply going forward and ensure a more sustainable future. So where does competition law fit in all of this? We heard before, those of you that were in the plenary session, Bill Kovacic say that in the US, with a more democratic, new generation approach, they want competition law to solve everything from, inflation problems to high prices to workers' rights, basically everything, and help, the democratic ideals, as they put it. How can competition law help this crisis, the energy crisis? And what is the impact that we're all seeing on regulators, how they enforce, on companies, how they behave, and on us as legal advisors, on how we advise the companies to deal with this crisis and the Green Deal while staying in compliance with the competition rules. I will be the moderator today. I'm Kyriakos Fountoukakos. I'm a partner at Herbert Smith Freehills based in Brussels. And I am very privileged to be joined by a great lineup of speakers to help me deal with these diverse issues of today. In the order in which they will speak, we will start with Marieke Scholz, who is online, is in Brussels right now, and Marieke is the head of the Antitrust Case and Policy Unit of the European Commission's DG Competition in the energy and environment sector, so really well placed to tell us what the Commission is doing. We will then hear from Alessandro Noce, who I think many of you in Italy will, of course, know, because he's a veteran of competition law, having been with the Autorità for 20 years, I think, Alessandro, and heads, and heads the relevant unit of energy here in the Italian authority. We will then hear from my partner, Francesca Mora, who's a partner at Herbert Smith Freehills, also in the Milan office of the firm, and heads the energy department. She's a corporate and competition specialist with a focus in the energy sector. And then last but not least, Rosa Aras, who is the head of Antitrust and Energy Market Regulation, Consumers and Communication Compliance Department at one of the energy powerhouses, globally and in Italy, Eni, which is a company known to all of you. So without further ado, Marieke, the floor is yours, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. I hope you can hear me. Yeah, because I can not really see you, but Okay, very
We
good.
can hear you and see you very well, Marike. Yeah.
Very good, perfect. So good afternoon to everyone, and thanks a lot for inviting me to this conference on this very important topic at the moment, of course. And I'm very sad that I couldn't be with you in person, but I'm glad that we nowadays have the possibility of joining remotely, which actually is a positive side effect of the Corona crisis, I would say. And it does show that there is also a lot of potential for change in a crisis, in each crisis that we're going through. And I think it's not different this time also for this energy crisis we're living in, which is very exceptional also to the fact that it's actually a double crisis. So we're not only seeing very high gas and electricity prices, but actually also disruptions of supply of gas as a fallout of the unprovoked invasion by Russia and Ukraine, and many other elements and effects of this that are really providing challenges, I think, for companies operating on the market at the moment. And the reflection also on the Commission side on how to deal with all these issues are, of course, ongoing. A lot of measures have been taken, and measures are to come as well. But I think what has been very clear or made very clear by this crisis is that we need to accelerate the green transition to reduce our dependency on fossil fuels, and in particular on Russian gas, and also to increase the decarbonization of the EU energy system. And this is also the reason why very recently we've made a proposal to increase the target share for the integration of renewable energy into the energy mix to 45% by 2030, which is actually double of what we currently have. So it's quite an ambitious target, but it's really necessary, in particular also to overcome this crisis. So what is now the role of competition law and all that? I think it already came a bit across in the introductory remarks. I mean, competition law is not a tool to achieve certain policy objectives, but of course it complements and supports other policies. And it sets a framework within which companies can operate on the market. So it delineates what can be done and what cannot be done to ensure that there's a level playing field and that companies have a fair chance to compete and to succeed in the market. As we know, it's only competition that keeps companies on their toes and pushes them to do better and reinvent themselves, and also to invest more and innovate. So when it comes to that part of what cannot be done, I would call that more the corrective part of what we're doing. So it's the real enforcement that we're doing on the antitrust side in particular. There, of course, it's very much in the focus of making sure that there are no distortions of competition that could hamper, in particular, also the green transition. So any conduct that could delay or could hamper the effective integration of renewables into our energy mix. And any other conduct that basically could hamper also the further enhancement of the internal energy union. On the other side of the coin, you have the part what can be done, and that I would call kind of the enabling part of what competition law can also bring. And it has to do with what companies can do if they're not able to achieve certain objectives on their own, and may consider cooperating to achieve these objectives, and where there has been sometimes a misunderstanding or the perception that competition law would stand in the way of such cooperation, while that's not the case if cooperation is designed and implemented in a way that is pro-competitive and actually enhancing competition on the market. This goes very much to the heart of what we have discussed in the context of sustainability during the last years. We had a very broad reflection process and a very good and inclusive discussion about how competition policy and the Green Deal objectives can go together, and how competition policy can help achieving these objectives. And the results of these discussions are reflected in the competition policy brief that we issued in September last year, which shows very clearly that there's a lot that can be done within the framework of the current rules. And it's also reflected in the dedicated chapter that we have proposed for the revised horizontal guidelines in the context of the ongoing review of the horizontal block exemption regulations. And of course, these documents are aimed at providing guidance on the approach we take as enforcement authority if we're looking at these agreements, and to provide further legal certainty to the extent that this, of course, is possible in a framework that needs to remain general, so that it can be applicable to many different situations. And these two elements that I just mentioned, the what cannot be done and what can be done, are for me two sides of the same coin, because it means applying the same principles. It's just that the perspective of how you do it, of course, changes according to what is the focus of the intervention. Is it more to intervene in a corrective manner, or to enable certain things and make sure that they are done in a way that everyone benefits? Now, coming more concretely to the gas crisis or the crisis-related measures. So there, of course, in the area of the corrective measures, one thing we are trying to make sure is that there is no conduct, commercial conduct on the side of companies that could have been contributing to the crisis that we're seeing at the moment, or exacerbating the crisis. And this is why we have been looking into the European gas markets, and in particular into the conduct by Gazprom since last year. And we're pursuing this investigation, of course, as a matter of priority, to see whether any conduct on the part of Gazprom could have been contributing to the situation we're having at the moment. And then, of course, at the same time, I mean, one thing is to look a bit at, what has caused where we are at the moment and what has been contributing. And the other part is, of course, to make sure that we don't have companies taking advantage of the crisis, which we have, for example, seen in these many investigations, in particular at national level in the COVID crisis. So, of course, this can happen any moment. And therefore, we're closely monitoring all markets to make sure that this is not the case. And in this context, or in this area, we've seen recently a lot of investigations started by national competition authorities that are looking into the fuel markets in view of the soaring prices that have been observed on their national markets there. And they've either opened investigations or sector inquiries, and some of them are already concluded, some are ongoing. And at least the ones I've seen so far have come to the conclusion that there was no collusion or possible abuse of dominance at the root cause, but still very high profit margins that have been basically observed on the part of the companies operating in those markets. So it's going to be interesting to further follow the developments in these investigations to see what also the other agencies will conclude. When it comes then to the enabling part, of course, that is more the question of, is more needed in such a very extreme or extraordinary crisis situation to tackle the effects of the crisis. And there we may see an increasing number of cooperation initiatives that try to overcome the effects of the crisis, and in particular severe supply disruptions. When you look at those corporations, I mean, if they are necessary to address these severe effects of the crisis and they are temporary in nature, there's normally no problem at all to enter into these corporations from the perspective of competition law. And this is something we've made also very clear in the ECN statements that we have issued both in the COVID crisis and also following the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. In these statements that kind of explain what's the approach that we will take, so that if these corporations are, as I said, necessary and temporary in nature and don't go beyond what is necessary to achieve the stated objective, then either you don't even have a restriction of competition law, or you could say that they are likely to result in inefficiency gains that outweigh basically the negative effects that any such corporation could have. And these ECN statements, of course, they are not, they're declaratory. Yeah? They're not the basis for doing that. They're just reflecting the way how we go about these type of initiatives. And if you want to look at a more recent example, I think it was 2 weeks ago that the German Competition Authority announced the clearance of the Corporation of Sugar Producers in Germany, aimed at addressing a possible drastic gas supply cuts and ensuing stoppages of the production facilities. And the Competition Authority came to the conclusion that this is such a type of cooperation that's temporary in nature. It's a one-off, and it's really aimed at ensuring that that basically the beet harvest is not rotten and can be used to produce sugar in that period, and that basically the companies can make available to each other their production capacities in case there were such a supply shortage and the need to shut down factories. This is also a bit what we had in mind with the references to contractual swap agreements of production between large industrial customers located in regions affected differently by potential supply cuts, which was mentioned in the recent Safe Gas for Winter communication adopted before the summer, where we also pointed to these different elements that, of course, you would have to look at to make sure that you are incorporating or implementing this cooperation in a pro-competitive manner. And maybe as a last point that was mentioned also already in the introductory remarks, we're also seeing other forms of cooperation in this current context, in particular in the gas market. So there is the project to look into a mechanism of joint gas purchasing to enhance security of supply and also further diversify the supply sources for Europe. This is an initiative that's being looked at in the context of the EU energy platform that has been launched in April of this year. And it's aimed at establishing a voluntary cooperation and a market-based cooperation. So a cooperation between companies where it's not the Commission or member states purchasing gas, but of course the companies themselves on the market, and where we're currently looking into mechanisms how this could be set up and implemented in a way that of course fully complies with competition law. And with this, I think I've made a bit the tour d'horizon of the issues that are keeping us busy in the crisis times, and I'm sure that my co-panelists have other issues to add.
Thank you, Marieke. Thanks for this introduction. And as you said, competition law basically has two avenues. One, to ensure that the companies compete, and that's good for the market, but also not to stand in the way, and that's all, you know, the points about cooperation and how the rules can be applied more flexibly if there are legitimate objectives during this crisis. You mentioned national competition authorities and what they do, so I would like to hand now over to Alessandro to speak about the Italian Competition Authority and your point of view in all this, Alessandro.
Yes, good evening to everybody. I also thank the organization of this important conference for having invited me. You know, after the Bill Kovacic presentation, I mean, my presentation has a title which is the antitrust in times of rising energy prices. And the idea behind many of the things I want to tell you is that we, as Italian Competition Authority, in the recent months have been asked to do things which are pretty different from the things we usually do as a competition authority. Or maybe there is a general quest from the public to consider antitrust authority as a general purpose agency which is able to solve almost anything. Does it work? All right, yeah, thanks. I don't know why in my computer everything was all right here. All right. So we are currently experiencing a cost inflation in Europe. And my point is that this is a very challenging task for antitrust authorities, because I was mentioning before public opinion. And when I say public opinion, I mean also qualified opinion. I'm politics, member of parliament, a large part of the public opinion tend to consider National Competition Authority as an agency whose main task is to intervene against generic price increase. And you all remember this also happened during the COVID crisis, but this was something much more limited in scope and dimension for masks or other items which were, you know, interested in those months of increasing price. This is much more serious. And as I wrote down, since autumn 2021, we have been, how can I say, we have received a lot of complaints from single consumers, firms, consumer association, members of parliaments on specific sector, all interested by this increasing energy prices. So natural gas for automotive, gasoline and diesel, pellets, which is something which is related to gas and energy, but is made of wood to heat houses, natural gas for central heating, district heating, which is the heat which in some part of northern Italy is used for heating houses. During a parliamentary hearing in April 2022, our chief of staff during this hearing stated clearly that price speculation or generic phenomena of spikes in prices is outside the scope of European and antitrust law unless it falls within the category of abuse of dominance and agreements, which means pretty obvious here, but is not obvious at all in many other, rooms and places. So we must remember people that we can't solve any kind of problem. Kyriakos, please, the next slide. Nonetheless, we ran some informal investigation, and I will, at the end of my short presentation, present some graphs regarding the second one, the automotive gasoline one, which was much more important for dimension, and we didn't find any. We already knew what we would have found, but at the end of the day, we didn't find any antitrust violation behind these price spikes. This is a very small case in northern Italy, but in order I want to put an emphasis on it, because we in April opened a case on a cartel in a no-tax area where we did find evidence of explicit collusion on pump prices. So this is when the competition authority can intervene in these sectors, when we have an evidence of infringements. When we have not this kind of evidence, it's very difficult to use our powers. You can go to the next slide, please. Here I want to say something which has, as Rosa knows very well, which has kept us busy in the last months. In March 22, the Italian government, well before any kind of European extra profit tax, which has been discussed and which is discussed in these days, introduced this tax on extra profits of energy company, and the same law gave the Italian competition authority also the task to monitor the margins of the companies affected by the tax in order to prevent any, how can I say, illegitimate pass-through of the tax on final prices, which is, as I put it, heroic, because you have to put on a very complicated system of monitoring, which we did, and you have to ask the firm monthly the data for the period in which the law gave us this kind of task. We have just in September sent 300 requests of information to the firms in order to obtain the data for May 2022. And then, and this is the most difficult part of the situation, we have to run tests. We are putting on an econometric system in order to understand whether there is a kind of difference between quarterly or on a longer length period margins as against benchmark period which has been decided to be on a pre-tax period of time. This is clearly something which the law gave us and is completely outside the scope of an antitrust authority. We had to make up a new competence. We had to spend long hours with the firms. Eni was one of those, but also the other, in order to understand which data to ask, how to ask them, and you never know whether you're asking the right data or not, because after the first request of information, the 12th of September, we are receiving 10 calls a day in order to, by firms asking whether they have to put the data in some way or another. And so this is something which is typical in this period of turbulence in the market. The competition authority are seen as an independent and also well-respected agency which can assess this kind of evaluation in a effective way. So we will spend the next months also doing these sort of things. Kyriakos, could you go to the next slide, please? I want to make a focus on the Italian fuel market because this was something really big in Italy when in March the price all over Europe went up, rocketed. And so there was public statement also by the minister saying that this was a kind of speculation going on, that the price of the oil barrel was at the same level as it was in 2008, when the final pump prices were much slower than now. And then why so? Why were we experiencing such a high price as compared to the price of barrel? If you go to the next slides, I will show you the first graph I want to present. These are the margins. I'm not showing the, I make a sort of clarification. I'm showing open source graph. We did have the graph. We could draw by asking the actual data from the firms. But these graphs are much more the same because open source data are very similar to the data we obtain by asking them to the firm. These are the margins. These are retail margins of distributors in Italy, petrol distribution in Italy, from 1st of January 2021 to the end of June 2022. It's very small, but you have Agip Eni, you have EP, you have Exxon, you have Q8, and you have Tamoil, and then you have the no logo, which is the pump prices, so with not the five majors. You see that all through the end of 2021, the retail margins is around a corridor between 20 cents and 15 cents. Retail margin is pump prices minus taxes and minus the quotation unanimously regarded as, a proxy of the refinery costs, which are the Platts quotation for gasoline, and in this case is gasoline, in the next graph is diesel. You see that some turmoil, but not so big, going at the end of 2021. Then there is this big increase, the peak which has, gained all the title in the newspaper at the beginning of the invasion in Ukraine by Russia. Then you see the retail margin quite rapidly going down to a level at the end of June, which is very similar to the long-term level we experienced all through the period before. Could you go to the next slide, please? You see that for diesel is more or less the same thing. You see a corridor around 20 cents and 15 cents. The spike, this negative spike is very tricky. We had an explanation for that. Essentially is due to the fact that, gasoline is much more at the heart of the crisis because Russia is a net exporter of gasoline in Germany, in France, in Italy not so much. So as soon as the war started, there have been a stop in the exports of gasoline from Russia, and since the prices are not priced by any and the other on a daily basis, I mean there is a lag between the quotation, the international quotation and the pump prices. This is due to the lag. Prices were referring at this day, the prices were referring to a quotation which weren't the real of the day of the actual prices. But soon after that, we have this rise, which is the same of the gasoline one, and then we have the decrease. When we, go to the other two slides, please. I want to show you what we did find. I mean, these are the same graphs you saw before, and this is the Platts quotation. What we, since the retail margin did go back to the long-term level, what we understand by seeing these two graphs, that the real reason of the high quotation in pump prices, this is 2021 and this is 2022, is that the Platts quotation rocketed high. So this difference between Platts quotation and retail margin, which was more or less stable in 2021, started increasing a lot during 2022. So if the money, is there someone who is doing money in the sector, this is not at the retail level, but it is at the refinery level, because a refinery is very profitable now. And the reason why is this is manifold. First of all, during the COVID crisis, refinery margins went extremely down, so people is just recovering from past losses. Secondly, the green transitions is something which is all around Europe, and refineries all around Europe are shutting down or are under revamping to become, how can I say, bio refinery. So there is an offer, there is a capacity bottleneck here. And if the market is working well, high margin in refinery means that new refinery capacity is likely to go into the market in next months, so the prices could go down. So at the end of the day, I'm sorry if I was a bit too long, we did all this work to understand that there was nothing from an antitrust point of view, that what we were experiencing is a typical cycle effect in industry. I must say that we were in good companionship because the CMA did something very similar to us and came to the same conclusion.
It's good to hear actually what happens in real life, right? You want to achieve a lot with antitrust, but then you look into it and you can realize that maybe there isn't an antitrust problem. The high prices are due to other factors that cannot easily be corrected through competition law. I'd like to now hand over to Francesca to speak a little bit about, cooperation, what else is happening to try to bring those prices down.
Yeah, thank you. So Marika anticipated the plan of joint purchases of gas within the EU energy platform. So from my side, just a very brief comment given the time constraints that we have. So Marika was anticipating that the Commission, of course, is looking at this measure in order to ensure compatibility with the competition law. And in fact, the REPowerEU plan, but also Article 6 of the regulation of the Council of last June, when envisaging a joint purchasing of gas, included an express caveat for that, so provided that these shall not unduly distort competition or the functioning of internal market. So the real challenge of the joint purchasing of gas, both at EU level, but also at national level, because there are also some proposals by, for instance, industry associations in Italy, but also elsewhere. So the real challenge will be to balance what is an effective measure to which fit the purpose, and the purpose is obviously lowering prices and ensuring gas supplies, with possible distortive effects on competition and more generally on the internal market. So we all know the difference on papers between joint purchasing agreements and buyer's cartel, but we also know that in practice these may be a little bit difficult, let's say, to distinguish. And above all, we also have to consider, let's say, the effects. So what is on the table right now is three possible different schemes of the EU energy platform, a joint purchasing agreement. So one is the joint gas tendering platform, so an aggregation of the demand needs and then allocation to the various sellers. However, to the various buyers, sorry, and each buyer will then enter into bilateral agreements with sellers. The other option is a joint venture. Joint ventures including all interested parties, and then allocation of volumes to each shareholder of the joint venture agreement. And then the third, let's say the third option, which is not necessarily alternative with, to the other two, is gas purchasing agents. So bigger companies with more buyer powers, negotiating agreements also for smaller players. So of course, those options have different competition issues to solve, or let's say to be analyzed in my view. And therefore the real challenge would be, again, to select what is the most effective options, also in terms of timing, because timing is crucial in this energy crisis. But of course, also considering the effect not only in a short term, but possibly on the market, on the internal market, and competition in the energy market also, let's say, in the future. So this is my short comment.
Thank you, Francesca. And I would like now to turn to the future, which is the Green Deal and more sustainable energy. And Rossa, I'm afraid you might have 5 minutes, if you can talk about what, is competition law standing in the way? Is it helping? What is the approach towards green, energy and collaborations?
Yeah, well, thank you, first of all, for inviting me to this panel. I will be very short, and I would like to, let's say, put forward the position or the needs of companies, but in particular of energy companies in this with this specific issue. They are facing a big change in the market, and sustainability is the hot topic right now, especially environmental sustainability for energy companies. it not only drives the demand, but also the investments. So especially for energy companies like Eni that are involved in an energy transition. So the entire corporate strategy is centered to find new alternative sources of energy and entering new market. In order to do that, companies need to cooperate in order to de-risk the investments that are involved, because the investments are going to be huge. The results are highly uncertain. The time horizon to recoup the investment is really very long. And so cooperation is needed in order to de-risk all of it and diversify also the investments. In this respect, we have been following the consultations and the conferences at EU level and at member states level, but we share the view of many respondents that there still is a lack of clarity as regards the assessment of such sustainable of cooperation agreements that have sustainable objectives. And in this uncertainty, I'm sure the Commission is aware, and the national authorities are aware, that this uncertainty might hamper or prejudice the investments because of the risk of competition infringements. So in this respect, certainly, guidance has been, Marieke was mentioning the fact that the horizontal guidelines have been reviewed and have in some sort taken into account these aspects, but still it is unclear how in practice these cooperation agreements would be assessed. One point that I would like to raise in this respect is the assessment of the scope of relevant benefits. Because, for example, we have two different views in this respect. If we look at the position of some national authorities, for example, the Dutch competition authorities, as compared to the EU Commission. Because the Dutch Competition Authority, in its sustainability guidelines, clearly shows that the efficiencies under paragraph 3 of Article 101 should be looked at and assessed, embracing the concept of benefiting the whole society. So, and not only the consumers that are, let's say, that suffer for or may suffer for the restriction in competition. While this concept has not been totally, let's say, adopted by the EU Commission, because the EU Commission specifically said that yes, collective benefits can be brought forward, but provided that the consumers affected by the restriction are included in the larger collective that benefits from the sustainability gain. The other point is the evidence, of course. Admittedly from many commentators, let's say. Evidence of benefits is difficult to find, and it's ever changing. And with this, in this respect, we understand that more guidance will be provided by the EU Commission once there will be the chance to deal with concrete cases. One solution in this respect could be to encourage the company to consult freely with, or more informally even, with both national authorities and the EU Commission. And this is what, for example, has been done again by the Dutch Competition Authority, which has recently, just before the summer, cleared upon an informal consultation a cooperation agreement between Shell and Total Energy to jointly develop a high capacity pipeline to transport and storage CO2 in empty natural gas field in the North Sea. To get, in order to secure the success of this project, Shell and Total Energy will offer, are allowed to offer the first 20% of this CO2 capacity, transportation and storage capacity, together, and therefore jointly setting the prices for this service. According to the authority, the cooperation is indispensable, so they focus on that, indispensable for the success of the project, and the environmental benefits for customers and society as a whole exceed the cost for the restriction of competition, provided, of course, that the remaining 80% of transport and storage capacity will be offered separately by the two of them. One other point that I would like to raise, again in terms of clarity and certainty that the company certainly need, let's say, to invest, is the point regarding the market for new products and the market definition. As E&I, we are working to develop more sustainable products in the energy business, starting from research for new energy sources like magnetic confinement, fusion, or wave energy, as well as biofuels like vegetable oil, which can be used in its pure form as a substitute for diesel, or biogas, which has the same chemical structure as fossil gas, but comes from a renewable source. Now, the question of substitutability between fossil fuels and biofuels is still not clearly resolved. So the point is, does consumer preference for sustainable product lean towards the definition of separate product markets? In this case, do we have to consider biogas as a separate product market from fossil gas because of these customer preferences? This, again, needs an answer because, again, let's say, raises uncertainties as to the scope of the new product markets and the way in which a transaction involving new products could be assessed.
Thank you very much, Rossa. I think we covered a lot of ground. So we heard about efforts to still investigate companies and ensure that they do not collude. But then we heard also a lot about possibilities for companies to collaborate, either via joint purchasing or towards a more sustainable future, under the new guidelines that the European Commission has put out, the Dutch authority and other authorities, the Greek authority. I know I see the chair of the Greek Commission here. So it's important to keep thinking about all these issues because they do affect how companies behave and how they are advised. Can they do something, or does it go too far, in which case it can get you into the illegal, basically, collusion rather than collaboration? We are at time, but I think given we're the last panel, we may be able to take some questions from the floor. So if anybody does have questions or comments you want to make, then there is the possibility of taking some. So I will open it up to the floor to see if anyone wants to ask anything about green energy, joint purchasing, high prices, etc. There's one question over there. Yeah.
Yes, hello. This is Tono Hill from MLEX. I had a question for Marique on joint gas.
Marieke, by the way, had to go. She had a hard stop, and that's why you don't see her on Zoom. So,
well, it could even apply. It's on joint gas purchasing, and what she was mentioning on the Commission working on a mechanism to ensure that this applies with competition law, and what are the challenges that could be faced, and especially how the Commission expects to deal with this, although there could be a problem there, I guess.
That was a
Marike
question.
cannot answer, but we'll
No,
try.
Marike cannot answer, but let's say this is exactly the point, because it will be, in my view, it will be particularly difficult to select among the different options what is the most effective one to tackle the crisis, but also not to distort competition. Just to mention, for instance, exchange of information. In a way or another, the volumes which are both must be sold and allocated to the various company. Yes, we can imagine, for instance, a single entity which collects all the information, right, but then the single entity must allocate those volumes in a transparent manner to all the other companies. Then there is also a question on how to allocate volumes and how to, let's say, include companies in the joint purchasing platform. Let's say on a dynamic way, because what I need now is not necessarily what I need tomorrow, because the gas consumptions it's of course it's dynamic. It depends on many factors, weather, just to make one example, but also the production, for instance, of end customers. So it's not a picture that we can do today for tomorrow and, let's say, a long period in time. So some of the options available on the table, like the joint gas tendering, is certainly less problematic than others, like, for instance, the joint ventures including all competitors together. So that is quite problematic in my view, and I wonder how, for instance, if we go through that path, how can we be sure that there will be no distortive effect on the market? But on the other hand, the option, and this is quite intuitive, the options which are less problematic from a competition law perspective are also the one which are probably less effective to lower the prices and ensuring the gas supplies.
Here, question here in front. Janos.
Oh.
Sorry, and then we have another question there. Okay.
Just a question to Alessandro. I was very much interested in the figures you showed. And you showed the retail level and the refineries. Have you looked to the wholesale as well? So my understanding is at the retail level, there is actually a limited margin and somehow stable, with the exception of a period around March. However, in the refinery level, we see an important increase of the margins, and I think we have the same kind of also analysis. What happens to the wholesale level? If you can complete the picture, it would be quite interesting. Yeah.
I think that at the wholesale level, the same price that you have take as a that you must take as a reference is this Platts quotation, because if you are selling wholesale diesel or gasoline, you are selling at a Platts plus quotation. So it's essentially the same thing, because it's a matter of make it or buy it. If you are a refinery, you make. If you are a wholesaler, you buy. But even if you are a refinery and the general condition is not, makes inconvenient to produce, you buy. Which is the reference? The Platts. We could talk hours. How good is this reference to be used all over Europe as a reference for pump prices? Because Platts is a private, I don't know if is a Standard & Poor's something, firms which make quotation, which nobody knows exactly how they are made. But by the way, at the end of the day, is a reference which everybody uses, And even at the wholesale at the refinery, because if you talk to refinery, they say, oh, I'm not able to know which are my real costs for each product. Because if I put a barrel of oil into the refinery, I pay for the barrel and I obtain different amount of each product regarding the type of oil, the density, the heaviness. And so I'm not, make a real, complete and correct computation of the cost. So I use the Platts as an opportunity cost. Should I buy instead of make? So I mean, wholesale or refinery, there isn't even a real difference.
A last question, I think that.
Okay. I will be very, very fast. So I think my opinion is that to lower the gas prices, the only possibility at the moment is to cap the gas at European level, doing it by member states, let's say, suggested by European Commission. It's what's not happening so far. And I think that the cap should be in the TTF because most of the contracts are indexed at this index, where there is a lot of speculation. I just would like to know your opinion about that. Thank you.
Have I an opinion? No, I don't know. No, I was talking with them before this panel, and we were just, sharing opinions. In my view, but I'm not an expert on financial markets. I read the non-paper the Commission released some weeks ago on the way they think they can overcome this problem of high gas quotation. And what really struck me is that, there is a clear position on the effectiveness of the TTF as a financial market. If you read this paper, they say that even the Dutch financial authority said clearly the TTF is a market which responds correctly to demand and supply stimuli, and that is what, the price the TTF is giving now is the price of the mainland transportation gas via pipeline in northwestern Europe. And all the paper is devoted as saying, beware, keep attention, because we have other prices signaled all around Europe, the GNL in Spain, the GNL in northern France, and so we can't put up cap on all the prices, otherwise we are running out of GNL, we are running up because people selling to Europe could easily go elsewhere. So the Commission in this paper just suggested either to use other benchmarks or to peg the TTF to a Japanese index plus €1. It's something which must be thought in details, because if you think at the cap, of the price cap as a buying cartel of all Europe against the Russian, is something, is not, this is politics, and I'm not saying anything about that. If you think of a price cap all around all the sources, so Norway, Algeria, Libya, Holland, because Holland is selling gas to Holland is a member state and is selling gas to other member states. How could you possibly do that? It's not easy, because it's something which must be thought. How could you put? And by the way, all these mechanisms imply public debt, because the difference between the real price and the cap price, someone has to pay it, because you can't deprive people from the value. Otherwise, you say, all right, the market is suspended for a year. I'm very happy not to be involved in this kind of decision.
We are really out of time. It was a great discussion, so I think it got going at the end, but I understand there is a walking tour now of Rome, and some of you are participating, so it is starting outside. I was glad to see that it's a sustainable tour, because it's walking. So that is the most sustainable way of doing it, and no buses or anything like that. So I will close by saying we can all do our bit, of course, by being responsible consumers and reducing our consumption in the winter to come. So with this, I would like to ask you to join me in thanking the panel for this great discussion, and then I'll see some of you at the dinner.